This week, we're looking at paintings rather than texts, rather than writing. But the same rules basically apply that an image can be read just like a text can be read. And so what we're looking at this week is a way for you to read texts. Read images, and it also to be able to contrast images, looking at one image as it's different from another. So we're looking at 4 images today. This is your reading, these images. And I want to review them quickly so you have some sense of what you're trying to do with these. So the issue really is try to understand what the images mean to us, right? How are we supposed to understand them? Now, again, remember I said in all texts, they always have a they say, I say. Paintings are the same. The paintings are a reaction to the period that they're in. So understanding the painting can help you understand something about the people who made it and the world that they lived in. Okay, so this painting here, this actually precedes the time frame of our course. This painting is called Cross Number 20, circa 1230. Circa means around about. So it was around 1230 AD that this painting was made. So that's the medieval period. That's quite earlier than, quite a time earlier than the Renaissance. And you'll notice this painting does not look what I would call realistic. Even the Christ figure in the middle isn't quite, it's more like a cartoon than it is trying to capture the reality like of a photograph, correct? But there are things worth noticing about it, like the Christ figure. First of all, what shape does it have? What are the images around the body of the Christ figure? What exactly why are the images like that, really small all around? Why is the Christ figure the biggest figure in the painting? Why is it in the shape that it's in? These are the sorts of questions you want to ask yourself, and the answer to those questions will help you to figure out like what's the painting's trying to do, like what seems to be its point, right? So to give you a very easy idea of this, right? The biggest image on this painting is the Christ figure on the cross, correct? So what's the most important thing to this artist? The Christ figure, right? It's clearly a religious image where the Christ figure dominates whatever's going on in terms of the figures around it, right? Whether they be angels or people or whatever, correct? All right. So again, this was made in about 1230 AD, and there's no artist's name, right? So this is important to us too, because like artists didn't name their works back then, just like nobody knows who made all those arts in ancient Egypt. They didn't name them. Artists weren't considered, their names didn't matter, right? But the next painting we're going to look at, and we're going to make a comparison, is this work on the right is by a fellow named Masaccio. This painting is called the Holy Trinity, and it was painted in 1427, 1428. So we're looking at about 200 years difference. But notice how radically different the paintings really are. Radically different. Still the Christ figure in the middle on the cross, but there's so many other things going on, right? Much more realistic looking, correct? Notice the figure behind the Christ figure. You might ask yourself who that is. Notice how the ceiling goes back in depth. And then there's these figures in the front, right? And then the skeleton at the bottom. All right, so it's a very different kind of picture. So you want to ask yourself as you think about this, what does it tell you about how people saw the world? There's clearly 2 different worldviews are in these paintings, 2 different ways of seeing their world. In the one, you see the Christ figure is huge. It's the biggest part of it. This one, it's a different emphasis now. The people are just as big as the Christ figure, right? And the Christ figure looks more realistic, more like a person rather than a cartoony drawing, And when I say cartoony, I don't mean it in a diminished sense. I mean that it's just more like a sketch and not really an effort to produce realistic imagery, the way a photograph looks realistic, right? So you can look carefully at this and ask yourself, well, what is the differences in these, right? And what does it tell us? So let's look at the next slide you'll be looking at. This is a close-up of the Masaccio. So you'll notice the figure behind Christ also has a halo. So you can ask yourself, well, who is that? And look at that little white thing there. What is that white thing at the figure's chin? What does that look like? Look like a bird, perhaps a dove, right? Notice the figure inside left is looking at the viewer while the hand is kind of flat and directed, right? I'll give you one hint though. These 2 figures on the outside, far left and far right on the bottom, that's the couple that hired the painter to make the painting. So they're in the painting, okay? So the question is, who are these people on the inside? They're probably holy figures, like maybe perhaps the one on the left is the Virgin Mary, for instance, right? This is her son on the cross. But you know, it's very different than the other one. So what I want you to do is think about those differences and what they seem to suggest about how people saw themselves in relation to God, right? And Jesus. Okay. So this is again 200 years after the cross number 20, and this is called the Holy Trinity. This next one is about 100, it's a little less than 100 years later. This is Michelangelo, and these are this is a painting from the Sistine Chapel. He painted the entire ceiling of Sistine Chapel. It's a number of paintings. This is just one of them up there. And it's called The Creation of Adam, all right? So again, very different look from the previous painting, only 100 years later. What do we see in this painting that makes it so uniquely different from the other, right? Like, what about the sizes of the figures? Remember in the first painting, the size of Christ was so much bigger than everything else? What's going on here? What's happening here? How about the godlike figure, the God figure? How big is he compared to the Adam figure? What about those figures around him? What they might be doing? Who are they and what are they? So I want you to notice again, like, what does that indicate about the relationship between God and man? Okay, in this painting. Another thing I want you to notice that you may not notice right away is notice the hand. Adam's hand is very well developed, but look at his foot is very undeveloped. It's as if it's the actual moment of creation. The creation starts at the hand, and the last thing fully created is the foot. And so that's why it's less developed. It's like a moment of actual creation is going on. But what does that tell us now about what the role is of man and God? Okay, these are the questions you want to ask yourself and write about. So I'll give you a close up of the Adam figure. Notice again, look how well defined the hand and the arm and the shoulders are. But when you get down to the leg and the foot, they're much less defined. That tells you, it signifies to this sense of the creation is an actuality. Like literally the touch has just happened and the figure is pulling away, right? By the way, on the bottom there, see that hand? That's another total different painting that's up on top of the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. As I said, the Sistine Chapel is full of all kinds of paintings and in different directions and stuff like that. And here's your God figure. Again, what is noticeable about this God figure versus the ones you saw before, particularly if you take it all the way back to cross number 20. All right, so for this particular module, there's no quiz, but there is writing to do about the painting. This is a chance for you to really try to like try and stretch those muscles of interpretation. Say, what does this tell you about how people saw themselves in their relationship to God? And don't be afraid to go back to my discussion of the history of the West. This is by 1508 to 1512, which is the creation of Adam was painted. This is the period of the Renaissance, the High Renaissance in Europe. And what do we know about the Renaissance? I actually told you what stuff about the Renaissance that can help you to figure out how to read these paintings. Okay, so don't be afraid to go back to that stuff in module 0. It'll help you to make the leap into seeing these paintings in a new light. Okay? All right. That's